So Frida Isberg, thank you for taking the time. We're I feel like two very different people in the sense that we grew up in very different places, and well, we found so much common ground. I like when that happens. I find common ground with an author about what they write, what they talk about, and it wasn't. I've talked about this book on social media before with people who listen to me or follow me, and I recommended the book. I was very excited when it came out in Spanish, so very happy to have you here, Frida. So thank you for being here. If you can tell the audience who you are, how you got started into, I guess, literature writing, and what the book is, just briefly, what it's about.
Okay. Thank you also, Ricardo, for inviting me. Yes, I am. Okay, I am Frida. I am 31 years old, from Iceland. I live in Reykjavik, which is the capital city, and I started writing very young. I grew up with a single dad who was a photographer, landscape photographer, and he would always say to me like when I came home from school and said like I don't want to be a police officer or I want to be a doctor or something. Then he said like I don't think that you will want to have a boss when you grow older. And obviously, this was just something that applied to him, and he was completely transferring himself
Yes.
onto me because he didn't have a boss and could never have a boss. Um, but um, but somehow this was just like the holy truth when I was 6 years old. So I started looking for professions that didn't include bosses, and I loved reading, so I just decided then that I would be a writer. And that kind of stuck. I just continued. I was always writing a book from the age of 6, um, and then I was, obviously like from the generation of Harry Potter, so I was always writing like fan fiction of Harry Potter, um, and then when I got to my teenager years, then I started reading Icelandic poetry and decided that I would, have to publish my first poetry book before I was 19 because my favorite Icelandic poet was 19. Her name is Steinunn Sigurðardóttir.
Okay.
And yeah, so it's just, I don't know. This is a really, really long explanation of who I am and how I became a writer. But yeah, I went to creative writing in the University of Iceland, and there I had by that point I was 25 and I had already kind of thrown away two manuscripts of poetry because I didn't feel that they were good enough.
Hmm.
And then after like just doing the masters, I kind of finally got the confidence to kind of follow my writing through. And so the Mark is my fourth book actually. I had published two poetry collections and one short story collection, and it was really like the short story collection is my kind of debut in Iceland. That's what kind of put me on the map and made it possible for me to become a professional writer. Um, so I guess that when I was um, looking for, or I wasn't exactly looking for um, content or like an idea for a
Hmm.
novel, but I would only always have the rule that I would just write, like if I got an idea that I would just write. I was not going to force an idea to become a novel. The idea would have to be big enough to
Hmm.
sustain a novel. It had to be the other way around. Instead of like growing an idea into a novel, then I would like my rule was kind of that the idea had to be a novel, or if it was not a novel, then it would be a short story. Um, and then this idea came in 2018 about the Mark, to write a utopia. And so by that time in my life, I mentioned my single dad, and it was just the two of us. We were always just like he would buy me like matching fleece sweaters, and you know, he was kind of like the coolest dad of the class. Uh, you know, he would always kind of allow us kids to do like adrenaline sports uh and buy us, you know, pizza and you know, let us watch the movies that we're not supposed to watch and you know, stuff like that.
Mhm.
So I always like my dad was completely like my hero, and and then like I got the freedom to become like the person that I, you know, like I got complete freedom to be like with the wild kids out all night, you know, and I started hanging out with other arty kids who were gonna go to the art high school. And we obviously decided that we were left side of the field of the political spectrum,
Mhm.
and we started reading like Marx, and we started reading, you know, philosophy, and then I remember I was like 15 or 16 when I came down downstairs from my bedroom, teenage bedroom, and the mayor of our town was in the kitchen having coffee with my father. And he was like very big, like a very big capitalist mayor. You know, he was like building towers and, you know, very conservative. And after he left, I was like, why was this guy in our house, you know? And my dad was just like, what? Didn't I tell you? Like, I'm running for office uh, for the Conservative Party. And so my father was a conservative, and I had no idea until I was, you know, 16 or 15 or something. So that was just like a complete crash of and clash of realities for me. It was just like my cool dad and then a conservative capitalist, you know. And from that moment on, we were fighting like cat and dog. It was just completely, and it just escalated year from year until, you know, when I was obviously like just about everything, about like refugees, feminism, Me Too, obviously, and cancel
Mm.
culture, and climate crisis, about capitalism, obviously, versus socialism. That was the first kind of seed into our polarized debates, basically. And then, so this had been going on for like my whole adult life when I started writing the Mark. So in 2018, I was 25, going 26, and I was, you know, moved out, and I was meeting my dad for, you know, 2 or 3 times a month, and we would just like argue nonstop for 2 to 3 hours, and then leave each other like completely raging, you know. And we're like both like very stubborn, and we cannot like we have to, both have to have the last word. So it was just like completely like at the end, I was just, at the time that I started writing the Mark, I was begging my dad to stop talking about politics altogether because it was ruining our relationship. And you know, the political landscape in 2018 was also like Trump was president, Bolsonaro, you know, Boris Johnson, all of these world leaders were like very aggressive, and the idea came that I would write a utopia where the power structure had completely flipped, and empathy was the kind of quality that people wanted to see most in their leaders. So the idea came that it would be like an empathetic
Mm.
society, and leaders would have to prove that they were empathetic. And then the idea of the empathy test came about. So, yeah, so it kind of slowly and gradually, very like organically also happened that society would like shift. There were more and more private and public spaces that closed. They're kind of they created like gated communities towards the marked individuals who they had gone into the empathy test and marked themselves in unofficial register that everybody can look up. And then the unmarked population in the beginning of the book is maybe 1/3. And then, the promise of this society is also that only 1% fail the test. And they are offered rehabilitation and therapy, and they can take the test again and again, and you can, pass eventually if you work enough on yourself. Sorry, so this is a
No, no,
really,
no.
really long intro, but yeah.
You answered a lot of questions I had, which was, I figured there was something that just triggered the idea in your head. I read some interviews from you that talked about how it took you about 3 years maybe to write the book,
Mm-hmm.
more or less. And I had a different author, a Spanish author, who came in who said that every book is like a career. It's just 3 years, 4 years that you're just learning about something, whether it's in his case, he's more historical fiction author, but even if it's just creative, you're focusing on one particular concept idea. So it was interesting to see that was. I'm assuming some of the book was kind of like you're just talking metaphorically, perhaps to your father in some way, arguing with
Absolutely.
him or not. And I mentioned at the beginning that we were from different places. You find out that your dad was from a political spectrum at 16. That would be impossible where I'm from because we get the dictatorship and everything. You just right away. But it was funny. You had your Kafka moment where you threw away everything you wrote when you were younger. You just, in your case, you're still here. So we're finding out your new work. So one that's a very interesting. I like I guess it's a very group collective concept that you have in the book, but the individuality of the experience for you to get to it. I like that aspect of it because it's a very humane story. I think a lot of people see it, especially today where there's big. I was reading yesterday because I figured that there's got to be some data on this, and in the U.S., this is U.S. at least, you have the election is coming in. It's in 2 months from now, maybe 2.5 months, and people in our age group. I'm 33. You mentioned we're 31. It's 13% boys going Trump, 38% going female. So I'm saying 30% more. I'm sorry. So I should say their favorite had 13%, 13 point advantage that Trump has in that demographic, and for women is the opposite. It's Kamala Harris, 38%, and so I think there's a lot of girls that probably have the same experience that you did, from our generation. And do you think was your book trying to tackle that at some level, or was it mainly just this concept of, hey, we can do this in a different way?
Mm. Well, I think that so when I was reading just psychology for researching for this
Hmm.
book, then like obviously empathy is just such a fluid concept. It's just like the definitions were so many that like I had to kind of pick and choose what empathy would be in this book. But like a common thread that I read is that um if we just go like very like just back to the basics of the herd mentality that we are, then we empathize most quickly to persons that are most like us in within our herd. So it's easiest for me to empathize with a woman my age,
Hmm.
from my like that I would kind of naturally consider to be my herd. And um and it's just like uh, and then it's just like suspicion towards other people is just like this natural, process of guarding yourself against other hurts. And so I think that this is the reason why narratives and stories are so important, is that we need to always be alert to our natural suspicions towards other people and learn the other stories and learn that they are just the same as us, and so like it doesn't really shock me that more men would be drawn to Trump and then more women would be drawn to Kamala. It's just like, I don't know. I think in this kind of mirroring, emotional mirroring that we always do, it's easier to emotionally mirror for women a woman.
Mhm.
Um, so that I don't know. I think this is also kind of, I was always looking at like the dark side of empathy in that way. The dark side of empathy is a bit like that because it's reverse prejudice basically. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like it's naturally easier to empathize with people that look most like you. And so and also like this is the reason I think that a judge would be lenient towards a young boy that looks a bit like him, because he can see himself in him and he can have sympathy and empathy for him. And then obviously like women who have suffered some violence
Right.
can empathize more with the woman. So so I think that this can be definitely like I thought this was very like an interesting way to kind of look at empathy, because empathy has been kind of the cure all antidote for evil for such a long time, like since World War II, basically.
Yeah.
The hippie generation, they were like, okay, we're gonna do something different. We're gonna like conquer war and hate with love and empathy, and we're gonna teach people to put each other in each other's shoes, and so it feels like empathy is this antidote towards all evils that can just solve everything. And of course it is, in a way. We need to always learn how to empathize with each other, everybody. But I think it can also be a bit blinding when it comes to judgment. And that was a bit like what I was looking at as well, navigating in the book.
Look, I saw you have this video online where you're reading some passages from the book and answering some questions, and you talked about politics, política, like the origin of the epistemology of the war, and this mentality of if you're not with us, you're against us that we have today. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm young enough, but old enough to remember sort of a world without, information on your phone 24/7. And my intuition is that this hasn't helped that divide. I think in different pockets of the world was already divided. The different places had either totalitarian governments like we did in my generation, or different political situations. But at the macro level, it feels like the world has definitely gone more your side, my side type of dynamic. This is just personal observation for you, but do you think this is somehow, is there something, is this always been the case and then social media just gave us access to it, or is it that it has exacerbated, it has made it worse somehow?
Mhm. Well, that was also kind of I like, obviously, because we weren't politically active before social media,
Mm.
basically. So we maybe don't have the um we cannot really compare notes. But after the book came out, then I was talking about polarization because of social media and because of the algorithms, you know. And I was always talking about that, and then there would always be a person in the room that was maybe like 70 plus or something, and they would tell me like, okay, but like polarization in media has always been the case. Like there were papers that were on the left side, and then there were papers that were on the right side, and those two papers were not really, you know, talking together. Like they would have different information, they would put different meanings into the same words, just like you're saying. So polarization is nothing new. But what is maybe new is that you can become an extremist in a day in Iceland, in the US, in Venezuela, in France, you know, and you can kind of tap into the same extremities, like tap into the five same extremities in, you know, 1 week. And suddenly you're in this herd of people that are anti this, you know. And before, you know, in before the internet, you would be like an extremist in one thing, and people would kind of like just like, oh, you where did you get that information, you know?
Mhm.
And so it's like the extremities were just much less, you know. So that's kind of the danger of today, I think, is that just there's always been fake news, there's always been a political divide. On both sides have been fake news, you know. But it's just like now it's really the algorithm is like, ah, you're susceptible for one false news, and then I'm gonna give you 15 other, you know. So that's kind of the danger of it.
I remember reading can't remember who it was, but this somebody who was part of this whole Silicon Valley movement of social media saying that the algorithm it is if you're a person in a highway and you slow down because there's an accident and you're naturally inclined to slow down and watch it, the algorithm thinks that you like car accidents. So it just keeps showing you car accidents because of one thing that you saw, which more than likely is something you may not like. We stop and read things that we hate or dislike more than probably things that we do. There's no such thing as the good news. It's always, if you see the news, it's always bad news. Nobody's going to be like, oh, everything is great. It's always going to be the opposite. So I think that my theory, or hypothesis, I should say, that I don't think we're made for this amount of information, for this amount of, by the time you get 3, 4, 5 data points more than the first one, it's been only 10 minutes tops, or maybe less. And I don't think it's been the case. I remember reading about um, places in Europe during World War II. Actually before World War II, the Nazis and communists were recruiting the same people. They were going out to the same neighborhoods. It wasn't different types of people. It was the same people, and there was time for people to let me get this flyer and let me talk to people about it and let me actually like process what I just was told, and then I'll make a decision type of structure. It wasn't that people were different from us; it was just the structure around them was just slower in that sense, and people didn't just fall for whatever the case might be. But I like that quote from you. I saw it in that interview that you can become an extremist in one day. Is It sounds obvious, but it wasn't like that. I feel like before. So it's definitely a new phenomena that we need to deal with. In that topic, um, do you think this you showed it was very interesting? I thought it was going to be. I like that about the book. I thought it was going to be. I don't know, like other books that sort of talk about future. You mentioned utopian, dystopian. If you're a different person, type of book. Um, you, some authors like telling the story with one character. It's just one person. You can talk about empathy. You can just kind of get to know the character a little bit more. You chose, hopefully I'm pronouncing this right. It's Betur, Eja, Ollie, and Tristan, and it's more mainly through them that you get to see this story Was there a purpose for each one of them? Was that something you thought about, or was there a reason, I guess, behind it?
Hmm. That's a good question. Well, mainly I have to admit is that I was gonna write the whole book just from the perspective of the first character that comes
Betur, yeah.
vetur, yeah, which means winter in Icelandic.
Betur, okay,
Um,
I'm learning.
um, yeah, and so she is so just to tell you a little bit about her, like she is a 30-year-old teacher. She studied uh, like philosophy and ethics, and so she decided to take on this teaching job for teenagers, and met this man who she had a love affair with. He starts stalking her when she rejects him, and at the same time their school is marking the school, so everybody, all of the employees have to go to take the empathy tests, and she quits the school when he starts stalking her, and she is so, obviously she has post-traumatic stress disorder.
PTSD, yeah.
Yes, thank you. um Afterwards, so she kind of, as a response to that, she moves into, or like she starts teaching in a marked neighborhood, because it looked like he didn't pass the tests, and so he is unmarked. He's not on the register, and she marks herself and kind of finds safety again within the walls of the marked neighborhood. She lives in an unmarked apartment in an unmarked neighborhood, and that's kind of the tension in her life. But the tension is also that she's not sure about this society. She's not sure about whether it's right to make the test mandatory. So she's kind of this ethical, thinker. She doesn't know what to think, but she knows how to react to her own safety.
Right.
So that's kind of also like ideology versus reality. Like in the end, like you will always kind of use the system to create your own safety, right? But but I was always just gonna write the story about her, but then I got bored, like so bored, writing about her, and then just like there's always like the first element for me in writing is always kind of the voice and the rhythm of the character that wants, and so the next one came in just like, and that was just so fun, when you start to write a character, it's just like a new love affair, it's all play and games, and there's no plot, not, you don't have to figure
Yeah, yeah.
anything out. You can just kind of go with the flow. And um and so obviously, like, I kind of wanted to write a character that would be kind of a bad woman, a psychopath or a narcissist, and she's unreliable, she cannot take any criticism. She will like always put the blame on everybody else. And then I wanted to see like what I could do, because we're always talking about sympathetic characters, right?
Hmm.
And I was just so curious, like, what do we need as readers to sympathize with a character? And like, do we need a backstory? Do we need a good person? Like, do we need to like have um the virtue signaling, do we need to have a character that, saves animals or feeds the homeless to empathize with them or sympathize with them? Or do we need a victim? It's very like it's very easy for us to sympathize with the people that are hurting,
Hmm.
so that kind of became like, so this financer, 50-year-old woman, she is fired in her first chapter for not passing the test because company as marking themselves. And so that for me was just like very fun to write her arc. It was just like she's written in a very strange way. It's just sentence, 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 you know.
Yeah.
And that's kind of because she doesn't have a cause and effect relationship. Like she just like goes on and on and on, and she doesn't really think about consequences. So I thought the style would really kind of have to be like that as well. Um, yeah, so it was always just a matter of being bored, you know. Then there, you know, then I grew bored of her, and then I wrote another, and then the fourth, you know. So the latter two characters in the book are Ólafur Tandri, who is I thought he was the hardest one to write because he is the most boring person as well. He is the kind of the face for the psychological association that is trying to get the marking through in the referendum. And so like you maybe talked about it in the intro, but in the beginning there are 2 months until there will be a national referendum on whether everybody should take the test or not. And so he is kind of in the campaign in like a group just pushing it, trying to push it through, and they're trying to use like publicity and, you know, trying to yeah, basically just manipulate a little bit the public into believing that this is the right thing, just like all campaigns do. And then he has like also kind of personal relationships that are he's always arguing with his wife and his father, who are both against the marking. And then there's Tristan, the young 21-year-old, who he is addicted to like empathy drugs, and he is a burglar. And he also has a young older brother who kind of, you know, went to jail. He was also in the empathy drug business, and he kind of is just fighting for his life to, he's kind of gotten it into his head that before the referendum goes through, then he needs to buy an apartment to be safe, because he's so afraid that like all of the neighborhoods will become marked and then he will be homeless. And that's an actual reality for young men in his position. So yeah, so it was just like, that's the very long answer, but the short answer is that I was just trying to have fun.
I actually, you mentioned Ollie was boring. I found it very interesting because he gave a face to that side that sometimes these types of novels don't have. As though it's like the system, or um, and I guess again, it's just I'm gonna go dystopian here, but like in Handmaid's Tale, you don't really get to see how they got to this conclusion, more or less. It's just Offred. It's just Offred that's the main character, and that's kind of where you see the lens through. 1984, same thing. I thought about a lot about the process, which is a Kafka book, and it's the same thing. Is that like the system, you can really empathize with it, and I think you in this book that you kind of have like empathy is the main topic throughout. You allow people, if they disagree with the test, then you can see where this person is coming from, that they're, well read, well educated, psychiatrists, so they know their stuff, and we can have something better. I was telling my wife that the I was reading it and I was like, would I agree with this test? Kind of like the first character. It's like I feel like she had this, I don't know what to think, but I know how I feel type of vibe to her, where it's like for my safety, I know this is good, but I guess from a more abstract notion, I'm not sure if this is right or not, and that's kind of where I was going with this. Is this right? Is this wrong? And then she reminded me that you've been saying for years that we should have a cognitive test for presidency, because we
Yeah.
got two very old guys, running for president. The oldest actually ever is in office right now, and if Trump wins, he will be the oldest again. So we're gonna break the record back to back. So it reminded me how things, if you package them in a certain way, you're either thinking about them more than you should or less than you should. It's just it's interesting in that sense. So you mentioned, I want to go back to something you said, that the neighborhoods that are marked. That was a very interesting concept to me, because that was more dystopian to me, the sense of, oh, I cannot even walk through this place, because it's not somewhere I'm allowed to go in. I'm not a marked member of society. But to some extent, that exact example may not exist, but it does exist in some places. China famously has their social credit score, but the US has their own financial credit score, and that credit score will allow you to do certain things. There are certain things that are within your power to acquire financially based on your credit score, which is not even based on money that you have. It's just credit score. So it's behavior, right? It's is the concept for you, is the concept of marked neighborhood, and this might be different in Iceland, but does that already exist, you think, in the world? Back home, to me, it felt like it was the opposite. It was a very high crime place. It was just impossible for us to go through it. Not to mention there are neighborhoods you can even go through in a car. It's just walkable, and that's it. And not for the good reasons. It's not the nice walkable. It's the wrong one. But do you think there's this is do we see the world going in that direction? Does it already exist? I just want to get your thoughts on it.
Well, yeah. I think that it's exactly like you say. We all have, every society has its credit score as well, and we are being tested all the time. And it's just like there are so many rules. There are so many rules in this, you know, crazy thing that we've created, which is society. And it's just like it's obviously we learn how to navigate it from like very young age. But everybody that's considered strange or different or difficult or dumb or slow or anything that's negative, those persons are the ones that have a very like small or big difficulty in following the rules or like gaining credit in their systems. And so I think that for as for that parallel, we're very not much far away. We have gated communities everywhere in the
Mhm.
world. Um, we have classes, we have class barriers, we have glass ceilings, we have, um, and then we have, just like even just like the school system is already kind of creating a divide, within within people. It's just like you're an A student and then you're a B student and so
Mhm.
it's just watching like Tristan, which is who is the last character of the four. He is also quite influenced by my brother, who is he's 19 years old now, but he was 12 or something when I started writing the book. And then by then that I had already seen like that if you grow up in a small town in Iceland and you don't watch and you're not good in football and you're not good in computer games, like what are you? You know? And it's kind of like my brother was there. Like he just like there were only like two options for him.
Mhm.
And if he didn't fit within like neither of those, then it's just like, okay, you're gonna be an outsider. Like you're not gonna pass tests, you know. And it's the same with like if you're dyslexic, then you're already just like then you're always just already being marginalized by community. So yeah, so but it was always just like this kind of always looking at, yeah, what are the social rules? What are the gates of our society? And also what tickled me all obviously about empathy as a barrier is that, like watching the empathetic kind of marginalize those who are unempathetic, the people that were supposed to be empathetic towards all just turned off their empathy towards the unempathetic, that cannot or will not participate in the values of the herd. So it's I think that's always kind of how societies and communities form. It's always shared values, and um, yeah.
I think nobody is truly individual. There's something you have to give to use your terminology, the herd, the society, right? You're part of both. Just listening to you speak, you reminded me of, I don't know, like 500 years ago, very few people spoke Latin, right? And then very even less could speak, could write or read, and then that changed. But the access to those sort of the world gets better, but the concept remains. Then there's this access to something that a lot of people don't have. Maybe we can say it was later on. It was computers. I mean, just whoever couldn't work on computers, you're basically illiterate in today's world to some extent, right? And then something else might come up. What if by the time we all know how to work a computer, maybe it's empathy. Maybe it's whatever maybe social currency we want to have that the world values. As I read the book, it was this could happen. It was I was skeptical at first, and then now I can see the argument because I see arguments similar to that today, and it was actually very interesting to view from that lens, individual versus society. You pay a price to be in society. Could the price be something that you have as empathy? In this case, empathy. Now, I guess the problem is with that. I'm not sure what your thoughts are, but it's you read more probably about this than me from a psychological literature point of view. Is empathy completely, fully based on the how you're raised, the environment, the people around you? Is there a you kind of have it or you don't component to it? Like you're an extrovert, and it wasn't necessarily that you were raised in a certain way. It's just your brothers and sisters, they're all introverts, but you're extrovert for whatever reason. It's could empathy be like that? I feel like Tristan had that sort of kind of like the tests. It reminded me of American born but Mexican by blood. Say here in Texas that they didn't cross the border crossed them. They were here before, and then the U.S. kind of kept pushing to the west. Tristan is just a normal person, and then suddenly there's a test, and then he's not normal anymore. That's sort of like the vibe that his argument to some extent was that, and there's a journey that he takes in the novel. But do you think that's if we do have a test of some extent, would that be a potential problem, or what problems do you see with it?
Um, Sorry, you asked the question in the middle there that I was gonna answer and then I forgot.
No, yeah, sorry. That do you think that do you think that this is doable as far as can some form of government have a test that's more psychological? Not a driving test, not a SAT score or IQ test, which is kind of a psychological test. But can we see it? And if we do see it, is there something that's potentially is it nature versus nurture type of argument? Where does it come from? Empathy.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so like from the books that I read, and I also just like I will completely just I'm not an expert. I'm a writer. So I'm not a psychologist, and but but what I read in like 4 books that were all kind of agreeing on one thing is that empathy is a quality that is like basically emotional maturity.
Okay.
And it's it's related to also like just the brain developing, and the brain develops until yeah, it develops until you're 60 or something. So with every decade you become more empathetic in that in that regard. People usually kind of and then they also were agreeing on that young boys develop empathy a little bit later than young girls. So they are kind of reaching their maturity peak in the age of like 25 to 27, whereas girls are like 22 or something like that. So it's like a little bit earlier, and I guess it's just, and so like I thought that this was kind of an interesting way to kind of because this is the exact age where men and women gender-wise and they get separated in the payment ladder,
Okay, income
so
bracket.
income the income they're in usually young, like men and women are equal up until around 27, when the women starts having babies. Then they lag behind and the men go up, So I thought this was kind of a fun way to kind of neutralize that, is that if the boys got less chance of employment before that age, and then the women would kind of lag behind because of the kids. So that was kind of sorry, I'm trailing off here. Your question. So I think that I honestly I can believe society to do all sorts of crazy shit.
Yes.
And so like in the future, yes, I could definitely imagine that there would be a psychological assessment for the citizens of some country. But maybe like, because you touched upon also like being an individual has a price, you have to pay a price to be in a society and community, because obviously like this is what we do. Like we flock together, we decide, okay, you're gonna take care of being a hospital, you're gonna take care of the rule making, you're gonna take care of the food making, we're all gonna divide our chores so we can, be together, and that will enhance our survival, chance of survival. Okay. And but I really do find it very interesting where this line is. Like, where does the rights of the individual stop, and then where does the rights of the community begin? And when I was writing the book, I was so obsessed with spaces, obviously like gated communities, but also just like the private versus public spaces. And so our only private space is our homes. That's the sanctuary of the individual. Like that's our kind of private property in capitalism, where capital is the unit. And then as soon as you're out on the street, then you're in a public space, which is in the realms of the community. And then I was just like, okay, but that's exactly the same with like the individual, is that okay, I have this autonomy here, but like my my real private space is my thoughts and my mind. Somebody, like, nobody can infiltrate that. But what happens then when community wants to breach inside here and get access to this kind of holy autonomy space, and so this kind of was manifested as well, that like all of the characters start at one point to break into each other's apartment and go in and out of these private, like, so. But this is, like, when I talk about this, like, this is, the holiest spaces that the community is not, like, supposed to go in there. That, like, that's my right to have my mind alone. But then, like, we don't all have autonomy for our bodies. We are not, in many countries, like, we're not allowed to control our autonomy, our bodies.
Yeah.
So, like, that's already a dystopia in a way. So it's we can find parallels to this existing in today's society, and we don't have to look very far as well.
It's what I liked about the book. It looks strange, but it looks familiar at the same time. There's I like books like that one. I forgot to bring up that I was laughing when I read this, that you're the book became in Iceland, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the book became in Iceland this flag to wear during the COVID debate, about the vaccine and everything. And I think you were double backs or triple backs, whatever the case might be, and people are using your name to support, I guess, I'm assuming both arguments, but at some point people use it to support the argument of not getting vaccinated. How was that for you to see that? Because you started writing it, that COVID wasn't a thing yet, correct?
No, I started writing it in 2018,
Right. Yeah.
and then I had finished it in January 2021. So, like, the last thing that got, like, because I loved, because this is, a book about polarization, then I loved taking, like, reverberations and echoes from today's society and putting them in the context of the empathy test.
Mm.
And I really wanted to, like, not take a stand for the reader. I really wanted the reader to form their own opinion of this society. And by doing so, like, I took maybe arguments that were considered left sides in the political spectrum and put them both on both sides in my book, and the same in the right. I would take conservative argument and put it on both sides of pro and against the empathy test, so the reader wouldn't know, like, oh, this is the right side, like, this is the right side, I'm supposed to be here. And so just, like, always trying to reach the gray within that political, yeah, basically always trying to reach the gray. But because I didn't take a stand also for the reader, because I was always trying to reach out to the middle, between my father and myself, I was always trying to go there, then people that were on a complete different opinion than me could take the book, and they were just like, yes, this book is championing individual thought, and not it's anti-government, so obviously when the book I'm babbling, but the last thing that got into the book from today's society was the marching into the Capitol on January 6th.
Yeah, I
and
remember.
So that was the last chapter of the book, was kind of influenced by that. And then the vaccination debate began. That was just in late January, February. We were all waiting to get vaccinated, and the real, like, the real like hardcore stuff of the vaccination debate that didn't happen until like later in the year. If you remember, that was like more into the summer when
Like,
everybody was supposed to get shots number 2. Like then shits went crazy, cars were burning, in cities of the world, and
yeah.
um and so the book came out in Iceland in October that same year, and um yeah, and it was so strange to see it kind of just completely hijacked online. Twitter was still a thing in 21. So on Twitter, I would see like anti-vaxxers just like, this is the book, like this is the book is looking into the rights of the individual versus,
Yeah.
and kind of using the arguments from this book to be an anti-vaxxer. And then, like, very gratefully, because it's Twitter, like, people that had also read the book would just, like, reply and have a counter argument. Um, but it was a bit chilling as well to see that, then to see that you can't really control anything after the book has come out. Like, I'm not gonna go on Twitter and
Yeah.
comment, like, no, this not, like, I've been vaccinated 3 times, like, leave me alone, like, I'm not gonna do that. But like, yeah, the discussion completely took a life on its own, um and
Have
that's
you
just
read
how it is. Yeah.
Have you read by any chance? There's this philosopher from, I think it's the 18th century, but it's Roland Barthes. It's a French philosopher, but he had this famous argument that's still discussed today in like in literature, that it's the death of the author. That as soon as
Mm.
you close that book and you send it to the editorial and they publish it, it's not your book anymore. It's the reader will interpret it in ways that you probably won't even know. And as time goes by, I think, for now it's COVID, but as time goes by, people, I think, will read the mark and think about something new that, you and I don't know yet, but they'll adapt it to it, as the great novels have done. A Brave New World in 1984, and all these things they they were written in a way they didn't see the things that we saw today, but you can interpret them as such. And only Orwell and Huxley know what they would think about today, and we're saying that we know, but we really don't know. I think Frida Isberg is going to be on that list too, eventually. So I wanted to talk to you about one thing that you had. I was watching your video, and you said this very powerful sentence. Before I get to it, I did an episode about the Latin American, what we call the Latin American boom, which was in the 60s, great literature period for us. We had all 6 novels from literature Nobel Prize winners came in that time, basically, more or less close to them. Uh, the all the great authors of the time were in Latin America. Europe is recovering from World War II. The Latin America has this, especially South America, has this magic to it. In that point in time, they're writing about their own experiences, which were different to the rest of the world, and they were very political at that time, and it was very aligned at the moment with the Cuban Revolution. Certain authors left that, and others remained, but the point was it was very aligned politically, and everybody was talking about politics. And I read this book that I have here somewhere, that's about letters of the great authors of that time that they sent to each other, and they're all talking about we need to be political. An author is supposed to be political. And in the video, you mentioned that in our part of the world, I'm not sure if that's Iceland or Europe or where the West, but you mentioned a lot of privileged writers have left the political debate. You didn't, which is refreshing to see. Why do you think that's the case, that people are leaving those topics off?
I think I think it's mostly because of uh, because they don't have skin in the game.
Hmm.
I think that, if you have skin in the game, then you cannot write about anything else than that. But if you are a well-off, you're getting fatter every year, you have, two houses, why would you do something political? Like, no, just, you know, flex your muscles and let the world see how well you're gonna write the historical novel for the thousandth of for the 1,000th time. Yeah, something like that. But like, it's just obviously, like, what's happening in the West politically are marginalized voices. Like, they are now doing the political heavy lifting. Um, but it's just interesting that there's so much shit going on as well, uh, and I just cannot see that going into books or literature anymore. And it's just yeah, you have to kind of, yeah, and so I don't know if it's just like, yeah, yeah, I don't know. I like, but it's like middle-aged men are writing historical fiction, and then female writers are, going into the self,
Hmm.
and it's just kind of, yeah, an abandonment of that sense. It's like, it's somehow writers are not centering themselves in that discussion anymore. And it's also like, I can feel um like only 20 years ago you would see, because I've been just like kind of going through the archives, you would see like a lot of writers writing political pieces in the papers,
Hmm.
and they would take like active like they would be active in the political discussion, and they would just like state their
Yep.
opinions. And this is also kind of retreating. And I think that maybe it's because of the complete overflow of information and overflow of opinions in our modern day society, like with
Yeah.
social media going on, but it's kind of like, yeah.
I've been trying to find because when you said in that interview, I was trying to think of an answer, and I wonder if it's just I'm not sure if it's planned out, if it's conscious, or if it's just people reacting organically to something in the sense of I don't know. If you go back to 19th century Russia and you got Dostoevsky, who is writing very politically, were the average person thinking politically like we are today? Probably not. I'm thinking, was he escaping reality through politics? Does that make sense? And are
Mm-hmm.
we today? Not all of us, but a lot of them, just organically going. I just don't want to. I'm 24/7 on this, and I don't want to speak it. Again, the writers back then. It's interesting. Latin America is a very highly political place because it's always unstable. I realized when I moved to the U.S., a lot of people don't know how government works. They didn't need to, but back home we did need to know stuff just to know what's happening. And but even then, these writers in the '60s, they were still like, we need to keep I guess the fire going type of mentality. I'm not sure why that's the case. I agree with you. A lot of essays from great writers are just pieces from the newspaper that from editorial that they used to write, and they just kind of they put a bunch of pieces together, and then boom, that you create this book. It's interesting that you're seeing less of that. I think it should come back at some point. But I think your book
Hopefully.
it's I think your book is part of it. I think some people also don't want. I think some just people in general, not just authors. Identity is such a big thing today, right? And any argument that you have, it's almost like an extension of yourself, and you don't want nobody likes to see themselves lose. So the idea must win, If you put something on paper that you clearly think out, thought out, like you did,
Mm.
from even if you don't provide an answer, so to speak, but you have an opinion on it and you express it. Um, what if I'm wrong later? That can put people like, I don't want to be in the wrong side of history, which is just something you hear a lot. You got to be on the right side of history, right side of history, and I'm not sure if people. I think most people are usually sure that they are on the right side of history, but what if I'm wrong? And maybe a long form book makes them pose that question way more than a tweet does, or a
Mm.
post on a story on Instagram is just that much quicker for you to do. But you spend 3 years. You definitely at some point you must have thought, what if I'm wrong? Of what I'm thinking, and that doesn't mean you think that, but that the framework of writing a book makes you think like that. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, but it's also the core difference is also that, like I loved what you said about, because writing an opinion on social media now is instant. You
Yes.
get instant gratification or you get instant
Rejection, I guess.
humiliation. Yeah, yeah. You're just like being humiliated for your stupidity.
Hmm.
But the core difference in writing fiction and then writing like something that's completely tied to your identity and opinions is that I have the buffer of my characters, so I can look at how they would feel here, and they would feel here, and they would feel here, and like that's the like I think that's the most essential and important thing about literature is that we can dive into um, things that we would never say aloud as ourselves, but we can explore them through the distance of a character that's fictional. And I will always, like, obviously, I have 4 characters in my book, and they have different opinions than me. But I can still navigate, you know, my current time, and I can go into taboos, and I can let one character speak a taboo and just like ask a taboo question that I would never dare to ask. And this is obviously, like, this is just so important for the human spirit, is to be able to fully investigate all of our dark corners, and because we would never do it under our own name. And it's the same with just like you can say you can look at all of the taboos on the social taboos that we have, like if just like plain like sexual fantasies or desires, like just finding some common humanness. It's very hard to get into that pocket of the human spirit without fiction.
I'm I agree with you. I remember reading about the Inquisition and how they would check if you had like a do you have a crucifix on top of your bed, and did you work on Sunday, because you're not supposed to work on Sunday, and if you did not work on Friday because that's the Muslim day, so you were supposed to work on Friday. There's very like is there any hint that you're not in the orthodoxy of thinking? And I think there's a little bit of that today. I think it's always been in humanity, but I think that mentality of I want to make sure that people don't think I'm in the wrong side, then you don't explore that thinking. And like you mentioned, fiction allows you to. I've always I always told people that the reason why the book is better than the movie is the book is it's budgetless. There's no limit on what you can do in a book, right? There is no for the author for yourself. You can go anywhere you want. There's no limit financially, and there's no limit creatively. And then when you read a book, I don't know, Tristan or Ollie, whatever they look like, they're made perfectly for me in my head for me, right? So I created them in my own self, and the way that I think they work perfectly. Then the movie comes out and it's totally different. Um, so I think you were right 100% with the book, in the sense of the discussion. It almost seemed like the book was forcing people to have a discussion nobody wanted to have, because I feel like people would have it but they're yelling at each other, or they're just replying online in a very aggressive way. That's why I like your book a lot. So I reach out to you. So I appreciate your time, Frida, for that. I think it's. I hope that a lot of people where I'm from, and in other places, read the book because it's it's very universal. The mark is it's at the beginning of the book is very abstract. I'm not sure if that was on purpose. You're almost. I was wondering first few pages, what is being marked? What's the mark? I didn't know. I wasn't sure what the mark was, and I think that gives it this very this could be anything. Forget about empathy. This could be are you part of this party or not? Which that has existed for a long time, blacklisted people and things of that nature. So my parents were actually part of that back home. So uh, I enjoy the book very much. Recommend people to read it. La Marca in Spanish. I like. Have you? How's that process? Now you have books translating so many languages. Has that been a challenge? Because it's a very Icelandic story, right? Is there something that gets lost in translation, as it usually happens?
Um, I don't I don't know what gets lost in translation, but I think that probably what gets lost in translation is word puns. I
Yeah,
love wordplay as well. So you can, and I love wordplay that is not like a joke, but is
yeah,
just like subtly a wordplay. So that will definitely have been lost. But
yeah.
but no, it's just always a gift to work with translators, and they are truly the best people in the world. Translators are like, writers without ego. So it's just like, yeah, it's just like the best possible version of a person is for me. And no, and it's always just so gratifying to see it in different contexts, because each country will take their own context and
Yep.
kind of fit it into this debate, which is, yeah, it's expanding, and I've learned so much, and I cannot be anything else than grateful.
No, best of luck, Frida, and I wish much more success for the book. Again, for the people who are listening to us, I've seen it on Amazon. I think you can find it basically Busca Libre, which is one of the websites that we sponsor the podcast. I've seen it be posted there, so if you want to find it, that's where you can go. So, Frida, thank you for your time. I realized I went a little bit over, but that's a very good conversation. I appreciate everything you've done from your work. I actually read a little bit of your poetry. I didn't have time to go into it, but I did read a little about your poetry before the interview. And it was something that was very interesting to me, how you went from that journey of poetry up to a novel. I feel like a lot of people have gone through it, but your journey was a little bit unique. So, very cool story. We went from this teenage girl and realizing something about her dad to this very well thought out story. So that's quite the journey. So I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you
I
for
appreciate it.
great questions as well.
Thank you.